So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here, and this is another episode of Backroads, Arizona. In this video, I'm going to be doing a water damage repair on my 38-foot Weekend Warrior toy hauler. So I purchased this toy hauler knowing that it had that water damage, and I got it pretty cheap because of it. We're going to go over how I did the repair and mistakes I made, so hopefully you don't make the same mistakes as I did. So I did a repair from the inside of the toy hauler previously, and I will post that video at the end of this one if you want to check that out, because most likely if you do have bad water damage like I did, you will have to make an inside repair as well as a repair from the outside like I did on this video. The main reason I didn't do a repair from the outside as well previously is because I was worried about messing up the paneling on the outside of the trailer, but this repair went pretty smooth. And truth be told, I should have done the repair that I did in this video a year ago when I did the inside repair. So let's get to it. So here's a good look at how much the right front corner is sagging underneath the trailer. And it actually would get a lot worse when I was hooked up to the truck and the weight was not being held by the jack stands. It was only being held by the hitch. So I went ahead and pulled off the trim material here and got that out of the way. I started to remove the trim that was going up the front of the trailer as well. I snapped the lens off of the front light with a flathead screwdriver and then took the 2 screws out for that. I didn't feel I needed to remove the wires because there was enough slack for me to do what I had to do. So the material did start breaking free, and then I took a putty knife because there was glue that was adhering the side paneling to some of the 2x2s in the wall. And I started scraping those and seeing if I could work the siding loose from the framing. I decided I needed a little bit more room, so I pulled some more of the trim off the front of the toy hauler so I could pull the siding further away from the framing. Then using a pry bar, I removed the main 2x4 that was rotted out, that was the main support for the wall in that front corner. And it just came apart in pieces. So that main 2x4 was secured to the frame with some carriage bolts going side to side, and then 1 or 2 going from a little piece of angle iron that was welded to the frame up through the 2x4. Using a pair of vice grips or pliers and an impact, I removed those and got those out of the way. I then decided I wanted to take the lower trim under the trailer off to see if the wood was badly damaged under there. So after removing all the wood that was rotted, if you have any that is still showing signs of maybe some mold, you can use a disinfectant homemade of 50% hydrogen peroxide, 50% white vinegar in a spray bottle and just soak it down, and that will kill any mold spores. We had a company come to our house after we had a water leak and there was mold in our carpet, and that's what he used to kill it. And I actually had done that on the previous repair. I soaked the entire walls and insulation at that time. So that was one of the carriage bolts that was going vertically, and I already removed the 2 that were going horizontally. Then I went ahead and pulled the extra little piece that was holding the front framing, and I figured I would incorporate that into the new piece of 2x4 that I was going to cut out. So after removing all that rotted wood, and I was finally back to some good support from that 2x4, using a Sawzall, I back cut it at a 45-degree angle, and that will give you more support versus just doing a straight cut. So I drew out a little diagram just to show you guys the difference on why a 45 is going to create more support than just a straight cut. So as you can see, the new piece I added with that 45, if it lowers at all, it's going to sit on top of the previously existing 2x4, versus if I would have done a straight cut, it might have been able to sag and nothing would be supporting it. So I did that same angle cut on the one side of the 2x4, then I set it up into place and pushed the siding against it so I could draw out what I needed to cut off of the other side. Once I rounded the front of that 2x4, I also had to notch it out a little bit. So I got that cut as well. And then this was the fun part, trying to get that piece of wood wedged up into place. Now I had my wife give me a hand with this, and we tried several different things. We basically had to lift the weight off of the front of the trailer to get it in. So what we ended up doing is pushing the top part of the 2x4 up into place and then putting some C-clamps on it, and then we were able to pry off of a little piece of angle iron that was on the trailer and keep tension with the C-clamps and basically pried it and tapped it into place. Since my new piece of lumber was only being held by one piece of angle that was already welded to the trailer, I decided to take another piece of angle and place it between the 2x4 and the frame rail, and then I'm going to run carriage bolts through the 2x4 and the angle iron into the frame. So I put it up into place right behind the pre-existing angle that was welded to the frame, and then I held it with a C-clamp to hold it in place while I drilled 2 holes through it so I could put carriage bolts through the 2x4, through the angle iron, and then through the frame of the trailer. I used a jack and a piece of 2x4 to lift up on the piece of wood and angle iron that I put into place to level it with the pre-existing 2x4 that was still there. Once lifting it up and making it level, I went ahead and drilled the 3/8 holes so I could put the carriage bolts through all 3 pieces. I did 2 carriage bolts through my piece of angle iron to make sure that that new piece of wood had plenty of strength to hold it to the frame. Once getting them both drilled and carriage bolts in, I went ahead and tightened them both down with my impact. So I used my spreader clamp to help push the 2x4 against the trailer some more because it was leaning to the outside a little bit. I bought a super long 3/8 drill bit at Home Depot so I could drill through the 2x4 from my pre-existing repair and the new 2x4 that I just put in, so I could use a carriage bolt through that piece of angle iron that was already there and go through both of those and sandwich it all together. Once getting the nut and washer on, I went ahead and tightened that down, and that was a little tricky because I could only pull the side paneling off so far. So I actually had a gear wrench. It's like a ratcheting wrench, and that allowed me to get in there to tighten that nut down on that carriage bolt. Then I removed the spreader clamp, and I decided to drill another hole through my new angle iron that I added. The trailer frame had another piece of angle that was welded, but it did not have a hole for a carriage bolt. I decided to add one there just because now that 2x4 was 2 pieces instead of 1. Once I got the long drill bit through both of those, I went ahead and put the carriage bolts in place. I actually had to drill out the holes in the angle iron to about 1/2 inch so the square part of the carriage bolt would tap up into place. And tightening those nuts back there, because I didn't have as much room as I did on the front, was even more of a pain in. So I was super stoked about how well this project had gone up until this point. I could not get the top of that 2x4 to push in, even with the 2x2s that were inside the wall of the toy hauler. And without that 2x4 sitting flush with those 2x2s, the side paneling would not have sat correctly, and it would have had a bow when I tightened it down. So I ended up using a Sawzall and just shaving the 2x4 down at an angle. I ended up taking about 1/4 inch off the top, and then it just tapered down and remained the same thickness at the bottom. So if you're doing a similar repair, you might also want to run some screws from the bottom of that 2x4 up into the 2x2s for the wall framing. I didn't feel I needed to do this because of the previous repair I did. I reinforced the wall with some new framing, and that was that second 2x4 that I put that 10-inch carriage bolt through. So that made that part of the wall secure. I used a tube of heavy-duty liquid nail to put on all of the framing that was in the wall so that the paneling would adhere to the framing inside the trailer. Using some plywood and 2x4s and spreader clamps, I pushed on the side paneling to hold it in place until that liquid nail was fully cured. Then using a dollar store retractable razor knife, because the blade extends quite a ways past the plastic, which made it easier to remove as much of the old caulking as I could to give a new sealing surface for the new caulking. I ended up using this Extreme Stretch by DAP elastomeric sealant, but any roof sealant should work. You just want to make sure it's able to withstand the elements and stay flexible its entire life, because obviously a toy hauler is not going to stay stationary for its entire life. I put that underneath the exterior trim. I ended up using a lot longer screws through the trim than what was originally there, because I used those screws to help secure the framing that was around the front of the trailer to the new 2x4 that I had replaced. As I came around the bottom of the trailer, I started reaching that angle iron I put. Using a 3/16 drill bit, I drilled through the angle iron so that the screws would go through that and anchor into that new 2x4 that I added. For whatever reason, the trim that was underneath the trailer ended up being a little too long, so I had to cut that off with a grinding wheel and then was able to anchor that bottom trim back into place as well. There was a thin strip of paneling that was underneath there as well. I added some caulking to help hold that up in place while I tightened the exterior trim down. It helped a little bit, but not much. After getting that done, there was some of the rubber weather stripping that goes in the trim that was still pliable because it was underneath the trailer, not getting hit by the sun. I went ahead and put that back into place and then screwed the end cap back on to hold it in place. So a lot of that weather stripping is missing out of the trim on my toy hauler. So I did go on Amazon and I found a 100-foot roll of this stuff for $17. I'm gonna go ahead and order that so I can make my trailer look a little better. Then I went ahead and fed the wires back into the hole and secured the light with the screws. I did put a little bit of that DAP sealant on the threads of the screws so they wouldn't back out because they seemed a little looser than what they were when I pulled them out. All that was left to do after that was spread the caulking around the trim to keep the water out. I used that same elastomeric sealant. I put a thin layer of caulking around all of the trim. Then using my finger, I spread the caulking very evenly. Now, a lot of people have said a wet sponge works good for this. I've just always had good luck using my finger. And obviously I went ahead and caulked around that light so I didn't get any water inside there as well. I did look at the top of my roof to make sure that seal that was previously done was holding as far as that goes, since there had been so much flex and sagging on the bottom end, and it seemed to still be holding pretty good. Here's a view of the repair after I was done with it hooked up to the truck, so all the weight is on the hitch and not on the jacks, and you can see it's holding up pretty good. We did go on a trip and did not have any issues. So if I do have a problem with this repair in the future, I'll be sure to do a video and let you guys know what went wrong, as I did with this one for my previous repair that I already did. So if need be, guys, make sure you click on that other video of the previous repair that I did. Obviously, I should have done both of these repairs at the same time from the inside and outside of the trailer. When I did that previous repair, I thought I had gotten 99% of that rotted wood out and didn't realize there was another 2x4 underneath the one that I had ripped out before. So lesson learned. So here's the final product, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. My channel is loaded with all kinds of DIYs, all with the same concept. Give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. Hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.